What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. It's 2024 now. We're moving on to the 2024-2025 NFL season, and we're going to sort of pick things up a little bit earlier than we did this time last season. Normally, I sort of wait a little bit until we get closer to the actual, preseason time. Normally, I'll start making videos around, June, July. But this year, I wanted to really start sort of talking about things a little bit earlier. I think a lot of things happen at this time in the year that a lot of people sort of go and just don't really notice. And it's a really exciting time right now in the NFL, despite the fact that we're 5, 6 months away from actually having NFL games being played. There's a ton of movement going on around the league. We've got a lot of free agent news. We've got the draft in a month, and it's going to be really exciting to see just what happens over the course of the next several months and sort of what's going to play out. And I think generally the more we can pay attention right now, the better off we're going to be when we get into July, August, September. We're really doing those drafts, and we've been up to date the entire time, so we're not playing catch up when things come, and we can really sort of just set our expectations now and sort of help sort of use that to guide things going forward. So it's a lot of fun. There's been a lot of stuff that's happening so far. I'm going to be trying to be making like a video maybe like once a week, just to sort of keep you guys engaged, keep myself engaged as well, and then we'll sort of ramp things up as the season gets closer and closer. But in this video, I'm going to go over just sort of all of the notable free agent moves over the course of this last several weeks. We had free agency open this time last week on March 13th. We've had a lot of moves over the last 7 days. There's still some more to come for sure, but it's been really exciting. I think it's going to be good to sort of help keep you guys up to date as well, and it'll help me just identify what I think is going to happen, what's going to be relevant in terms of what happened over these last several weeks. So it's going to be a lot of fun. As always, if there's anything that I missed, any players or news that I didn't mention here, feel free to let me know. I tried to cover everything, but maybe I missed something. It's certainly possible. So let me know if that's the case. I'm more than happy to just sort of help fill you guys in and give you guys all the insight I have. And then, as always, if you guys have any specific questions, just let me know in the comments. It's a lot of fun. Got a lot more time on my hands this time in the year than I do during the NFL season, so I can definitely give you guys as much in-depth stuff as possible. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, with that, let's just sort of get into the first set of players. We'll start with the running back position because there was just a ton of turnover there. So I want to start things off with the running back position. I'm going to start us off with probably the most notable free agent signing this offseason at the running back position. Granted, there were a lot, so certainly is open to interpretation in terms of which one's going to end up being the most relevant. But I think Saquon Barkley signed a 3-year, $37.75 million contract with the Eagles. It includes $25.5 million guaranteed. Pretty much locks him in Philadelphia for at least the next 2 years. They could potentially get out of it in year 3, but this does give us a nice 3-year window for Saquon Barkley. Obviously, he's a locked and loaded running back one for me in this offense. This is a legitimately high-powered offense. I know they struggled a little bit last year, but there's just no way in hell that they're going to be any worse than what the Giants were last season. They gave him this big of a contract. It pretty much locks him into being that 3-down back in this backfield. I know there are a lot of Kenneth Gainwell stands out there. I like Gainwell as a player, but he's going to be used intermittently, maybe sparingly on third downs. But this is going to be a guy in Saquon who's going to get all of the work. There are still some concerns, obviously, in Philadelphia. We know Jalen Hurts just historically doesn't really throw the ball to the running back position a whole lot. Maybe that changes with Saquon Barkley, but it didn't really change last year with DeAndre Swift, and that's one of Swift's specialties. So I wouldn't expect there to be a ton of passing game volume here for Barkley. There wasn't a lot of that for him last season either, so I don't think that really is necessarily a negative. It just sort of lowers the ceiling just a little bit. Then there is obviously just a little bit of a concern as well with the touchdown upside. We know that if the Philadelphia Eagles get to the 1-yard line, it's Jalen Hurts. I know that Jason Kelce retired this offseason, so we could see potentially a shift there. Maybe they don't use the tush push quite as much, but I feel like they're still going to use it quite a bit. At the 1-yard line, it's safe to say Saquon's not going to get very many carries this season, but he only scored 6 touchdowns last season, played only 13 games, and he still finishes the RB12. He's just clearly going to be a running back one in this offense. This is a huge upgrade at offensive line, a lot more scoring opportunity just in general for the offense. So Saquon Barkley probably finishes the season with 8+ touchdowns. We could even see him get up into that 12 number. Probably ends up with like 1,300 rushing yards, catches 40 passes. Should easily be like a fringe top 5 running back, and he's honestly one of the few running backs that I think has a legitimate shot at finishing as the running back 1 overall. I won't have him ranked that way. He's obviously going to be probably ranked around that fringe top 5, but he's a locked and loaded RB1. You should be really excited if you have him in Dynasty or if you've got him in a keeper situation. Next, we've got what I think is probably the next most relevant signing, and that's actually going to be Derrick Henry. He signed a 2-year, $16 million deal in Baltimore. There's $9 million guaranteed in year 1 for him. So this is sort of a 1-year deal for Derrick Henry. It could potentially turn into 2 if he plays well this year. He can earn up to $20 million in this contract if he plays well, but there are obviously concerns for Derrick Henry. He's 30 years old. This obviously is a guy that at some point is going to just fall off a cliff. But even last season, he was still really good. He finishes the RB8 in Tennessee, which is just not an offense that really set him up to succeed. I know he was the focal point of that offense, but Tajay Spears was extremely involved as a pass catcher in that offense. There's no real reason for me to believe that Derrick Henry can't at least match the production he had last season. I think there's just a lot more touchdown upside for Derrick Henry here as well. He should be a workhorse running back here. I do think we will see quite a bit of Keaton Mitchell on third downs. But Derrick Henry's never needed that third down or passing game work to really be super relevant. He's a good player and a good offense. I think he's definitely going to be probably a fringe top 8 running back for me this next season. Definitely in Dynasty, it's a little bit scarier. If you have him in Dynasty and you're not a contender, I'd probably consider moving him. But in redraft, I think we get one more year out of Derrick Henry. I'd be excited about this signing for sure. Next, we've got a pretty exciting and honestly a little bit of a surprising move, and I'm going to talk about two players at once here, and that's going to be Josh Jacobs and Aaron Jones. Josh Jacobs pretty quickly in free agency signed a 4-year, $48 million with Green Bay. I do really want to note here with that Josh Jacobs contract, it looks massive, 4 years, $48 million, and it is a lot of money, but there are only $12.5 million guaranteed on that contract that basically, in essence, makes this a 1-year, $12.5 million deal for Josh Jacobs, where he has the potential to earn the rest of that if he plays well. I view this more as like a 1 or 2 year signing for the Packers. So if you have Josh Jacobs in Dynasty, I think it's certainly a reasonable decision to make if you want to look to move him. Sell high on the news because the contract and the numbers do look a lot more exciting than when it really was. For context, I just traded Josh Jacobs in a league. I have too many running backs in that league as well, but I traded Josh Jacobs for Terry McLaurin, and I swapped first. I traded a 2026 first for a 2025 first. So maybe that helps you guys, but that's just sort of a little bit of my advice there. Aaron Jones, after the Josh Jacobs signing, was quickly released and signed it with Minnesota on a 1-year deal. I believe it's for $8.5 million. I think, honestly, next season I'd prefer Aaron Jones over Josh Jacobs. I think that Josh Jacobs should be a really solid asset here, but he was just really not all that good last season, was extremely inefficient, didn't really break very many tackles, and I know it was a really bad situation for him in Vegas because they had to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo. Aiden O'Connell didn't really allow for a lot of success to happen in this offense, but he just didn't look like the same player that he looked like 2 weeks ago. Maybe he was a little out of shape coming into the offseason, having sort of held out for a little bit with that contract dispute. So maybe we see a better Josh Jacobs. I do like the offense in Green Bay quite a bit. I think Jordan Love's legit. They've got a lot of really good receivers, so he should be a part of a better offense here. But I will note that A.J. Dillon re-signed. I don't think that necessarily means a ton here. Josh Jacobs should operate as the clear workhorse back in this offense, but I just don't know how talented he is at this point in his career. I think Josh Jacobs is going to be like a low end running back 1 for me, a relatively safe pick, but I just don't see a super high ceiling for him. Just didn't look explosive for me. There is a chance here that this offense takes a step forward. So I think if Josh Jacobs ends up as like your running back 2 on a roster, I think he'll be really solid, but I wouldn't expect him to sort of bounce into that like top 3 running back that we saw like 2 years ago. For Aaron Jones, he's going to serve as the lead back in Minnesota for a team that's honestly going to have a rookie quarterback. They've traded to have an additional first-round pick already, so they have pick 11 along with pick 23, I believe, in this upcoming draft. A lot of people expect them to trade up into that top 3 and draft a quarterback. I think that makes a lot of sense here. There's obviously a really wide range of outcomes here for Aaron Jones. He looked fantastic over the last half of last season. Not even the last half, like the last couple games, and then during that playoff run they went on. So Aaron Jones clearly still has it, but obviously injury is always going to be a concern with Aaron Jones. Just a really wide range of outcomes here for Aaron Jones, just because of all the uncertainty surrounding the quarterback position and depending upon his health. But he's going to operate as the lead back if he's healthy in this offense. I do like Ty Chandler a little bit, but he's not going to get enough work to really scare me there. I think he should probably be drafted as a running back 2. I think I'd view him as like a RB15 is probably where he should end up going in drafts right now, but there's obviously legit upside there. He could easily be a top 10 guy. One thing I'll note, though, is that since 2018, there has not been a single running back that has a rookie quarterback finish in the top 6 at the running back position. So I'm not saying that makes Aaron Jones a bad pick, but it's just sort of something to take note of. It's really difficult for these rookie quarterbacks to support high-octane offenses. Running backs generally need a lot of touchdown upside to really crack into those like top 5, top 6 of the positions. So just keep that in mind, that range of outcomes for him. You're probably looking at running back 7 as sort of a ceiling for him. I know it's possible because Aaron Jones is a really good player, but I don't view him as a guy that could actually finish in the top 6 in this spot. Next, I want to talk about Tony Pollard. He signed a 3-year, $24 million with Tennessee. Tennessee spent a lot of money this offseason, but they're going to be building around Will Levis, and it's just going to be a really bad offense. Tony Pollard didn't look great as a player either. I think you can still sort of view Tony Pollard as like a low-end running back 2 this next season. Maybe a fringe top 15 guy if things break right for him, but I do like Tajay Spears quite a bit. I would definitely not completely bury him. I think there's a chance that Spears is just the better player in Tennessee. It's just a lot of mouths to feed as well. They've got DeAndre Hopkins, they've got Calvin Ridley, who they signed. I'll talk about that later. They've got Treylon Burks, Chig Okonkwo, and I just don't think this is going to be an offense that can support that many pieces with Will Levis. So I think I'd be looking elsewhere for Pollard. I don't think this is a great signing. I would have preferred it for him if he ended up back in Dallas, but it's not a bad spot. He got a decent amount of money. He could certainly play better. He looked better over the latter half of last season, so he's got a shot, but I'm just not excited about it here for Pollard. Next, I'm going to talk about DeAndre Swift here, and he actually got a really great deal this offseason. I'm pretty excited for him. He signed a 3-year, $24 million deal with the Chicago Bears. That came with $15.3 million guaranteed. Mind you, that is more guaranteed money than what Josh Jacobs got this offseason, so that's certainly something that we can be at least a little bit excited about. Obviously, not a fantastic landing spot, given that Chicago's going to be going into next season, likely with Caleb Williams. I believe the odds are like 23-1 right now that the Bears take him with the first overall pick. So it's safe to say Caleb Williams will be the quarterback for the Chicago Bears next season, and DeAndre Swift should operate as the lead running back here. I just don't really love the situation. I've talked a little bit earlier about how it's just really difficult for rookie quarterbacks to support extremely high-end production out of the running back position. And on top of that, I don't view DeAndre Swift as like a full workhorse running back. Really, no team that's had him has really been comfortable giving him that role yet. So we'll probably see 50 to 60% of the snaps. We'll obviously get Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson worked in. Roschon Johnson, I think, operates as the 2 in this offense, but it's a pretty good spot for DeAndre Swift. They paid quite a bit to have him. They clearly like him. He's a talented player. He is obviously going to be dealing with a pretty significant downgrade in terms of what his offensive line situation is going to be. So I think overall he probably slots in as like a fringe running back 15 for me, probably into like that low end to mid tier running back 2 conversation. Should have some boom or bust just sort of performances, just given the nature of him as a player. He's obviously a really explosive athlete, not a guy that's really going to grind it out between the tackles very often. So you're pretty much banking on either a high reception game or just him breaking one long play or two in the course of a game. So I like DeAndre Swift. He's probably going to finish right around where he finished last season. I think he's a really solid asset right now. Next, we've got a guy who's really just sort of fallen from grace here, and it's really sad to see. Hopefully, maybe he's got 1 or 2 more years left in him. Maybe last season was just an injury, and just maybe he'll be right back to the same old self. But Austin Ekeler is had to settle for a 2-year, $8 million deal with the Washington Commanders. That is not a lot of money at all. That is the same value on a per-year basis that Antonio Gibson got to leave the Washington Commanders. So really, that's about the sort of level or tier of player that the NFL seems to value Austin Ekeler at right now, and I honestly think that's about right. He's obviously just going to operate as the pass-catching running back behind Brian Robinson. I don't have a ton of confidence in this offense. They do have the number 2 overall pick in the draft, so you can pretty confidently expect them to be drafting a quarterback, especially given that they traded Sam Howell to the Seattle Seahawks. Sam Howell will obviously not be the quarterback here, so we're going to have a different quarterback in Washington. Austin Ekeler should probably just operate as the 3rd down back behind Brian Robinson. Honestly, probably giving you like the same equivalent fantasy value to what Antonio Gibson's given you the last 2 years, and he's probably just going to be overdrafted just because of the name value, and on top of that, he might not even be as good of a player as Antonio Gibson at this point. So I'm probably out on Austin Ekeler. We'll see where he ends up getting drafted, but I would view him as like a running back 4 for me in fantasy at this point, obviously with a bit of a boost in PPR. Maybe he's got a little bit of upside just because maybe he can get back to that level of production that he had before the injury last year, but I'm not excited about it. I don't fully expect myself to have too much Austin Ekeler in 2024. Now we'll just sort of get into some rapid fire here. I'll just cover all of the other running back news that I found was relevant. I'll start off with one that I think is actually pretty important here. It's going to be Devin Singletary signing a 3-year deal with the Giants. They gave him, I believe, $18 million over the course of that deal. That is pretty good money for a running back, especially with what we've seen given the running back market over the course of the last couple of years. The Giants lost Saquon Barkley this offseason. They don't have a ton of draft capital, just especially given with how many needs they have at all the other positions on their roster. I could see a world here where Devin Singletary just gets to be the starter in New York, and he's obviously not going to be as good as what Saquon Barkley has been over the last couple of years, but he's a good enough player. He should have a pretty good role, and I think Devin Singletary could be a solid running back too for us next season. Zach Moss signed a 2-year, $8 million deal with the Cincinnati Bengals. This came on the heels, or really just in line with the Bengals trading Joe Mixon to the Texans, who then immediately signed a 3-year deal with the Texans. Pretty exciting here for both players. I think Zach Moss is in line for honestly a really good situation. I do like Chase Brown in Cincinnati quite a bit as well, so I think both those guys are going to get some work. But Zach Moss is a talented player. He played really well last season, and it's a great situation for him. So Zach Moss is going to be a player that I'll keep my eye on for sure. Joe Mixon traded to the Texans, got that 3-year deal as well. He's going to be their guy in this offense. I don't really see a world where they spend a draft pick on him. Obviously, Dameon Pierce is still there, but they didn't want to use Dameon Pierce at all last year. I think Joe Mixon can probably still be a top 15 running back this year for Houston. Antonio Gibson signed a 3-year, $12 million deal with the New England Patriots. Just kind of a bummer of a signing, honestly. I think that he is obviously a talented player, but not good enough to steal enough work from Ramondre Stevenson that he's fantasy relevant. But it's just going to make both players sort of muddy. Both of these guys are guys that specialize as pass catchers, and we don't even know who's going to be throwing the ball for them in New England. So, not super excited about that. I think it just sort of makes both them like low-end plays for me. I still prefer Ramondre Stevenson there, obviously, but I'm just not super excited about any running back in New England right now. Alexander Mattison signed a deal with the Las Vegas Raiders here. I think it basically makes him the 1B to Zamir White being the 1A in Vegas. We'll see if they draft anybody in this upcoming draft here. But as it stands right now, I still prefer Zamir White to Alexander Mattison, but this does sort of make me a little bit less excited. I don't really see a world here where Zamir White just ends up getting all of the work. And then Deonta Foreman signed a 1-year deal with the Cleveland Browns as well. Not super relevant, but there is a chance still the Cleveland Browns cut Nick Chubb, saved themselves that $11 million this season. So if that happens, we could see a situation where both Jerome Ford and Deonta Foreman could potentially be somewhat fantasy relevant next season. And finally, here we'll get into what might be one of the signings that you guys were just super excited about and probably wanted to hear me talk about for sure. And that's going to be Kirk Cousins signing a 4-year, $180 million deal with the Atlanta Falcons. This one's going to be super fun here. The Falcons, just given the deal they gave him, included $100 million guaranteed, that they don't seem to be worried at all about Kirk Cousins' Achilles. We'll see what happens. Obviously, it is a really significant injury here, but I do believe Kirk Cousins not really being a mobile quarterback means that he should be able to recover just fine. He hasn't ever really been super dependent on the mobility aspect of his game, so I think Kirk Cousins should bounce back in a fine way, and I think obviously the Falcons are betting on that as well. On top of that, they made several other moves to sort of help boost this offense as well. They added Darnell Mooney. They signed him to a 3-year, $39 million deal. I think that's a good move. Darnell Mooney's a really great deep threat. He's a talented player. Just wasn't really in a great situation there in Chicago. They also traded Desmond Ritter for Rondale Moore to the Arizona Cardinals. Doesn't mean a whole lot. I'm not super excited about Rondale Moore as a fantasy asset, but he's a talented player. Is enough. You can use him as a gadget player, manufacture touches for him. It should just sort of help the offense as a whole. I think that in general, if Kirk Cousins is healthy, he's probably going to be like a low-end quarterback one, sort of the way he has been. I think this is going to be a team that's still going to want to run the ball just a little bit more than maybe you'd like. Obviously, Bijan Robinson's extremely talented. Tyler Algier is a more than capable player, but they do have a new head coach here. Obviously, we saw Arthur Smith leave, who is now the offensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're going to see this team run a lot more 3 wide receiver sets, and that should open up the passing game. So I think you can still expect Cousins to be good. I just wouldn't expect him to be like a top 5 quarterback because it's just tough for guys that aren't mobile to do that. Drake London, however, he could legitimately be a top 12 fantasy wide receiver. I think if you want to draft him as your wide receiver one at this point in the fantasy season, I think you could totally do that. I think he's going to be a really talented player. He's been a monster just in terms of his opportunity and his like ability to perform at a high level with the little opportunity he's been given. He's only 22 years old. I'm a firm believer that Drake London's an extremely talented player. Obviously, you're paying up. It's sort of going to be the equivalent of drafting Garrett Wilson last season. You're banking on that new quarterback coming in and playing at a high level. So there's some risk associated with it, but if Kirk Cousins does hit, I think Drake London's legitimately got a shot to be a top 5 wide receiver even. I think he's that good. Bijan Robinson has an opportunity here to be the running back 1 overall as well. Kirk Cousins is more than willing to throw it down to the running back position. On top of that, Bijan Robinson is extremely talented. This is a good offensive line. This offense could score a lot more than they did last season, so Bijan's obviously really solid. Darnell Mooney could easily be a solid wide receiver 3 for me. Probably going to be more of a boom-bust profile because he just operates so much further downfield than a lot of these guys, but I like Mooney. I think if you want to draft Mooney as like a decent flex asset, you could definitely do that. He's definitely someone that I'll be keeping my eye on where he's being drafted. And then Kyle Pitts, he's back on track here for me. I think I have him probably coming in as like my tight end 7 at this point, just because there's so many other tight ends that sort of blossomed last season. But I think it's worth taking a swing on Kyle Pitts. I have sort of been just unwilling to draft him each of the last couple of years, but I will be now, even with the likely increased cost come draft day. I just think he's extremely talented. A year further removed from that injury, I think obviously Kyle Pitts could have a great season as well. But I do want to just sort of highlight here, there's obviously a huge range of outcomes. We've got a quarterback going to a new team, coming off of a major injury. None of these guys have really proven it, honestly, outside of Bijan Robinson. So there's a lot of things up in the air. If Kirk Cousins doesn't perform at a high level, it can't be worse than it was last season. The coaching was awful. Quarterback play was awful. So you're going to get better production out of this team than you did last season. But if Cousins isn't himself, maybe he gets hurt again, sort of like a New York Jets situation with Aaron Rodgers. There is obviously risk there, but I'm excited for the Falcons. I think it could be a really fun season in Atlanta. Next up on the quarterback list, I want to talk about Russell Wilson, who was released by the Denver Broncos and signed a one-year deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I love this landing spot for Russ. I'm maybe one of the few people out there that still truly believes Russell Wilson is an extremely talented quarterback. By no means do I think he's the same Russ that he was back when he was, second team All-Pro in the MVP conversation, but I still think he's a really talented player. Did actually play pretty well last season. He had 26 passing touchdowns to 8 interceptions. Had a really great stretch in the middle of the season where they won 6 games in a row. Team just started 1-5 because that defense was at a historically bad pace at the beginning of the season, and the Broncos obviously had to bench him because they didn't want to risk that injury here. So Russ getting cut, it's by no means an indictment in terms of his ability to play. It was all contractual, just sort of what was best for both sides there. And I think that Russ is in a good spot here. George Pickens obviously gets a significant boost, but there's just likely going to be more moves coming from Pittsburgh. They've already traded Deontay Johnson to the Carolina Panthers. I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But I think that really that makes George Pickens, if nothing changes, he's a clear wide receiver 2 for me. We obviously saw Courtland Sutton score double-digit touchdowns last season. I believe George Pickens is a better player than Courtland Sutton at this point in their career. So Pickens obviously gets a huge boost for me here. Going to be a guy that I'm definitely keeping my eye on, but there's a lot of rumors surrounding what the Steelers could be doing here over the next couple of weeks. They're reportedly actively trying to add another wide receiver. I've seen reports of Brandon Ayuk, potentially Terry McLaurin coming to this team. So if either one of those things happen, it would obviously be a huge hit to George Pickens, but regardless, he's going to have a legitimate quarterback. It can't be worse in Pittsburgh than what it was, so Pickens is going to get a good spot here. Pat Freiermuth should be in line for, more usage as well. Russ has always liked throwing to his tight ends, but I think in general this is going to be a more NFL relevant move than an actual fantasy relevant move. There's not a whole lot of options in this offense that I think are going to be like high-end producers. You probably get like high-end running back 2 production out of Najee in Pittsburgh. Jaylen Warren remains being like a flex option. And then Pickens probably going to be a boomer bust wide receiver 2. Pat Freiermuth can be like a low-end tight end 1, and then we'll see what happens with the rest of the offense. But I don't view Russ as like a high-end fantasy starter by any means. Maybe a streaming option. We'll see who they add. Maybe this offense just plays at a really high level if they add a guy like Brandon Ayuk. I've seen rumors of a Justin Jefferson trade potentially happening, so we'll see what happens there. But for now, I think this is just good for Russell Wilson. I think he could easily win 10, 11 games, make the playoffs for this team. But I don't think there's going to be necessarily a huge boost in terms of what the fantasy production for this team is going to be. Next, we'll talk about Gardner Minshew just real quick. He signed a 2-year, $25 million with the Las Vegas Raiders. He's going to start there this season. They're going to call it a quarterback competition between him and Aiden O'Connell. But when you give a guy this much money, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, especially for a team in Las Vegas that has so many needs and isn't picking all that high in the draft for them to really take a quarterback, at least in my opinion. So I think Gardner Minshew is likely going to be the starter for this offense, and it just honestly doesn't change a whole lot. I think the offense gets a bit of a boost compared to last season because I do think Gardner Minshew is a better player than Aiden O'Connell. But in general, you're going to have maybe one more year out of Davante Adams if he can still play at a high level. Jacoby Myers, he's like a low-end wide receiver 3 or 4. And then, maybe Michael Mayer takes a step forward. Zamir White, Alexander Madison, they'll battle it out. But it's not going to be an offense that I'm super excited about by any means. Next, I'll talk about Baker Mayfield. He signed a 3-year, $100 million deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Super excited for him. Obviously, great to see him sort of get his career back on track after just sort of being dead to rights after a year in Carolina and the Rams and competing with Kyle Trask in training camp last season. Just a really great story for Baker Mayfield. And honestly, it looks like the Bucs are just going to re-roll things from last season. They've re-signed Mike Evans to a 2-year deal. They re-signed Chase Edmonds as well. So we're likely looking at the same backfield between Rachaad White and Chase Edmonds. Chris Godwin's still there. I like Trey Palmer as a solid wide receiver 3. I will note that Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who was the quarterback coach for the Seattle Seahawks the previous year, is now the head coach for the Carolina Panthers. That's a bit of a concern for me. Dave Canales has proven to be a really talented offensive mind. I like what he's done over the course of his entire career, being the quarterback coach in Seattle, sort of nurturing Russ for a while, and then really rebounding Geno Smith's career, getting him on track, and then rebounding Baker Mayfield's career. So Dave Canales is clearly good at his job. We saw Geno Smith take a step back last year after losing Canales, so it's possible that we see that again with Baker Mayfield. I'd be a little bit worried about it. I would expect things just to be a little bit worse this season than what they were last year, but overall, I think you're going to see a lot more of the same. Mike Evans probably takes a bit of a notch down, like a high-end wide receiver 2. Rashad White probably like a running back 15 in this offense. Godwin's going to be like a wide receiver 3, and then Baker's going to be a streaming option. And last, I'll just get into a couple of other quarterback notes as well. Jacoby Brissett, he signed a one-year deal with New England. It was 1 year, $8 million. I don't fully expect New England to start him by any means. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Patriots with that third overall pick to take a quarterback. So I think Jacoby Brissett's just going to be a solid backup in this system here. Jameis Winston signed a one-year deal with the Cleveland Browns. That's pretty exciting, honestly. We know Deshaun Watson could easily miss more time, and Jameis Winston's just always fun to watch. He's great for fantasy options, so that's good from a fantasy standpoint. Jimmy Garoppolo signed a one-year deal with the Los Angeles Rams. He also received a 2-game suspension for performance-enhancing drugs. So for the first 2 games of the season, they won't have him, but he's obviously going to be the backup for the Rams. I think it's a pretty big boost, to be honest, because we've seen how bad the quarterback play has been in Los Angeles whenever Matthew Stafford misses time. This gives them like a legitimately competent backup. So if Matthew Stafford were to miss time, I think your shares of guys like Kyren, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, they'd still be okay. You could definitely count on those guys still. And then Tyrod Taylor signed a 2-year deal with the Jets for $18 million. That's legitimate money. I like it quite a bit. Tyrod Taylor is better than anything the Jets had at quarterback last season. And if something happens with Aaron Rodgers again, maybe he just has to miss more time, I think he'll give them more confidence at the quarterback position. The Jets' offense should be at least better than what it was last season. So it's a good, solid move by the Jets. They've got a nice safety net there. Next, we're getting into the wide receiver position. I'll start things off with the biggest name off the board in Calvin Ridley. He signed a 4-year, $92 million deal with Tennessee. Honestly, this is a horrible landing spot. I think even Calvin Ridley knows it. If you watch his introductory press conference with the Tennessee Titans, he talked openly about how he wanted to go back to Jacksonville, but the money for Tennessee was just too good to turn down. He knows that Jacksonville is a much better team, a much better offense, and he really did pretty much just admit to us that he signed with Tennessee for the money, and I can't blame him, obviously. He missed several years with the suspension and the injury, so by no means a bad move by Calvin Ridley, but from a fantasy standpoint, I don't think it's going to be great for him. There's a lot of weapons there in Tennessee. You've got Ridley, you've got Hopkins, Treylon Burks is healthy, at least for right now. Chig Okonkwo's there. On top of that, you've got Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard in the backfield. So you've got arguably 6 names that are going to be at least on people's fantasy football radar this season, and all of those guys are going to need to be supported by Will Levis, who has not proven to be capable of doing anything at this point. They hired, I'm blanking on the name, but it's the Cincinnati Bengals offensive coordinator from last season. He is now the head coach in Tennessee. There's at least a chance here that maybe Will Levis can take a step forward. I liked some of what I saw out of Levis last season, but I think he makes a lot of bad decisions. It's not going to be an offense that I think we can rely on a super consistent basis. There is the possibility here that this defense is just really bad as well, so maybe you find yourself in some garbage time shootouts, but really I think Calvin Ridley is just going to end up being like a wide receiver 3 for me, and it's going to be really boom bust. I don't think I'm going to be someone that really drafts much of him at all. You're just going to need the Titans to be a lot more pass heavy than what they've been in the past, and that is possible, but there's too many mouths to feed, not enough production that I expect to come out of this offense, so I'm just not excited about Calvin Ridley this season. Next, we've got Marquise Brown, who signed a 1-year, $11 million with the Kansas City Chiefs. Honestly, this is a perfect landing spot for Marquise Brown. It's a great opportunity for him to resurrect his career at just 26 years old. He's obviously battled injury for the last couple of years, so this is good for him. He's probably going to operate as the third option of this offense. He's got a shot to be the number 2 here. I think it's a safe bet to say that Travis Kelce's got 1 year left in him as still like the clear number 1 in the offense, but Rashee Rice, talented player, but not really a guy that won downfield a lot. It was just a lot of manufactured touches for Rashee Rice. So I think Marquise Brown's going to be a guy that can at least help stretch the field for Kansas City. And I think really it might just end up being an addition that's more meaningful for Patrick Mahomes and the entire offense. He'll give them an actually competent deep threat, something like guys like Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Mecole Hardman couldn't do over the last couple years. So Marquise Brown should be a boost for this entire offense. Probably ends up being like a solid flex play. A guy that you're playing for high upside, hoping he catches that deep pass, and if he doesn't, you're going to be disappointed. But I think Marquise Brown's still talented. He's proven he can play in the NFL at a high level, and this is a pretty good spot for him. You can't be upset if you have him. Next, we've got fan favorite Gabe Davis signing a 3-year, $39 million deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars, effectively replacing Calvin Ridley in an offense that Unfortunately, it just spreads the ball around a ton. We obviously have Christian Kirk there, who's going to see a ton of targets. Evan Ingram, who gets a ton of targets close to the line of scrimmage. I think Gabe Davis is obviously going to act as the field stretcher in this offense, but we know he's a guy that they like to, at least in Buffalo, they like to bring him into block quite a bit. Not going to see a lot of manufactured touches in this offense just because there are a lot of guys that do get those manufactured touches. Guys like Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne, obviously. So I think Gabe Davis is a good player and he should be useful for the Jaguars, but he's likely just going to end up being a boomer bust flex play. Just again, that just might be all he is, at least in a fantasy standpoint, for the rest of his career. Honestly, it's a bit of a downgrade for me. More target competition in Jacksonville. Trevor Lawrence is just not as good of a quarterback as Josh Allen. So, with that being said, I think Gabe Davis honestly just isn't going to be a guy that I'm super excited about going forward. Next, we've got a guy that I'm actually pretty excited about, and that's going to be Curtis Samuel, who signed a 3-year, $30 million deal with the Buffalo Bills. And honestly, I love this. Curtis Samuel could easily be the wide receiver 2 in this offense, and on top of that, he's going to be given a lot of manufactured touches. He's reuniting with his offensive coordinator back from Carolina in Joe Brady in Buffalo, and on top of that, there's a lot of Sorry there. On top of that, there's a lot of rumors circulating that Stephon Diggs could potentially be moved this offseason. On top of that, we did see Stephon Diggs just honestly not play well for the latter half of last season. There's a legitimate opportunity here for Curtis Samuel to be a guy that ends up leading this team in targets. Obviously, most of them will come close to the line of scrimmage, but Joe Brady's talked a lot in the past about how much he likes Curtis Samuel as a player. I think he's really talented. He managed to earn targets at a higher rate than both Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson last season in Washington. He's a good player. He got good money outside of Stephon Diggs. There's no true target hog in the offense. I know Dalton Kincaid's a good player. James Cook's going to get used out of the backfield. Khalil Shakir flashed a little bit last season, but Curtis Samuel's a good player. I think he's got legitimate upside here. He's going to be manufactured enough touches that I'm excited about him. He's probably going to be a guy that, assuming the price is reasonable, I'd be really happy with, like my wide receiver 3 or 4 in fantasy next season. Next, I want to talk about Darnell Mooney just one more time. I talked about it earlier. He did sign that 3-year, $39 million deal with the Atlanta Falcons. I think it's a really great landing spot for him. He's honestly really talented deep threat, really speedy player, and Kirk Cousins does throw one of the best deep balls in the NFL. Unfortunately, he is going to be at best the number 2 option in this offense. We know at least pretty confidently that Drake London's going to operate as the alpha in the offense, and I personally would bet that he ends up finishing the season 3rd or even 4th in this offense in targets. I think Kyle Pitts should see more targets in the offense. I think Bijan Robinson's going to get used out of the backfield quite a bit. So you should see a lot of deep targets, though, and those do have a lot of high value in fantasy. So he's probably going to be like a boomer bust flex play, a guy that if this offense clicks, if Kirk Cousins plays at a high level, I do think Darnell Mooney could have some fantasy value, but I wouldn't be super excited about him as anything more than a flex play. Next, I'll just move on to some other wide receiver news that I'll touch on. I want to touch on both Los Angeles Chargers wide receivers. We have Mike Williams, who was released by the Chargers and signed a 1-year deal with the New York Jets, a 1-year, $15 million deal. I think it's a pretty good signing here in general. The Jets needed a number 2 wide receiver outside of Garrett Wilson. Nobody really stepped up and filled that role for them last season. And Mike Williams has a very different role in an offense than what Garrett Wilson will serve. So Mike Williams will be the deep threat here. He got hurt in week 3 with that ACL injury, so he should be totally good to go from an injury standpoint. I think he's obviously got a shot to be Mike Williams. And if Aaron Rodgers is healthy, this offense obviously has a lot of opportunity here, but just again, a really wide range of outcomes for these Jets. There's a lot of questions surrounding Aaron Rodgers and his health, questions surrounding Mike Williams and his health and his ability to stay healthy, especially at the age of 29. So a little bit of concern there. Keenan Allen was traded for a 4th-round pick to the Chicago Bears. This is great for Caleb Williams. He's going to come in with DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Swift, and Cole Kmet in terms of his weapons to throw the ball to. So that's really great for the rookie quarterback here, but it's going to be a downgrade for Keenan Allen. I view him more as like a wide receiver 3 at this point. Obviously a really talented player, but he is 31, probably going to be 32, I believe, during the season. Just not an age that I'm really super confident in, but he does operate closer to the line of scrimmage. Should pretty clearly be a quarterback's best friend. Did play really well last season. So Keenan Allen has obviously got a lot of upside. I would just consider it a pretty significant downgrade for him going from Justin Herbert to an offense with a rookie quarterback. And on top of that, I can't not talk about Justin Herbert here as well. He just lost his 2 best pass catchers and lost Austin Eckler this offseason. The Los Angeles Chargers are going to run the ball a ton. They've got Greg Roman as their offensive coordinator. They want to do that. I would expect generally significantly worse production out of Justin Herbert this season from a fantasy standpoint. KJ Osborne, he signed a 1 year deal with the Patriots. Kendrick Bourne re signed a 3 year deal with the New England Patriots. None of those really excite me. Kendrick Bourne is currently the wide receiver one in New England. They also lost Devontae Parker, who signed a 1 year deal with the Philadelphia Eagles. Not really excited about any of those guys. There's a chance that the Patriots end up adding Marvin Harrison in the draft. If that happened, Marvin Harrison would have an opportunity to be potentially useful with Jacoby Brissett, but I'm not really excited about any of the pass catchers in New England until they prove otherwise. Jerry Jeudy was traded from the Denver Broncos to the Cleveland Browns, and then he immediately received a 3 year, $58 million contract with $41 million guaranteed. I don't know who his agent is, but he deserves a raise because the Browns got kind of fleeced here. Jerry Jeudy is in his fourth year at this point, or fifth year at this point, and he has yet to put up a 1,000-yard season in the NFL. Just hasn't been good at this point. He's had way too many drops. Can't really. It just hasn't performed at a high level. I do think he's a talented enough player. He can get open, but with Deshaun Watson at the helm, he's probably the number three option in this offense behind Amari Cooper and David Njoku. I'm not interested in fantasy, in Jerry Jeudy in fantasy at all. And then Michael Thomas, he was released. It's done. We don't need to talk about him anymore. It's been 5 years since he was fantasy relevant, so I think we can just sort of move on from Michael Thomas at this point. Next, I'll talk about Hunter Henry. He re-signed with the Patriots on a 3 year deal. So again, the Patriots sort of just re-signing what they had last season. They did lose Mike Gesicki this offseason and added Austin Hooper. Austin Hooper's a bit less of a threat as a pass catcher, so you could see Hunter Henry be a little bit more involved. He's a low-end tight end streaming option. Just not super excited about him, and we still don't know who the quarterback is. So a lot of question marks there, but he's still in New England. He's a good player. It's just not a great spot for him at all. Noah Fant signed a 2 year, $21 million extension with Seattle. I just want to note this because Seattle let Will Dissly and Colby Parkinson go in free agency. They both landed in Los Angeles, one landing with the Chargers, the other one landing with the Rams, respectively. Noah Fant's a good player, and he's got a shot to be relevant here. I know he's probably going to operate as the fourth option in this passing game, obviously behind that trio of wide receivers they have in Seattle, but he's a good player. He's been fantasy relevant in the past, and they've got a new offensive system in Seattle. Pete Carroll's out the door. So we'll see what happens there. I think tight end is just generally a wasteland, but this year there are kind of a lot of options that are emerging. Obviously, we've got the guys like Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, Trey McBride, David Njoku, George Kittle, Kyle Pitts, TJ Hawkinson when he's back. So there's a lot of names still. I don't think tight end's going to be as much of a disaster as it's been historically. So maybe these dart throws aren't necessarily worth taking too much of a look at. But Noah Fant's a good player. He's got a shot here at least to be relevant. And finally, we'll just close things out with the rest of the tight end news here. Mike Gesicki, I talked about it earlier. He left the New England Patriots and signed a 1 year deal with the Cincinnati Bengals. Gesicki is going to operate out of the slot a lot. That's generally where he plays. And the Bengals did lose Tyler Boyd in free agency, at least for now. He hasn't signed anywhere, so that's why I didn't talk about him. But if that stays that way, Gesicki could end up being a relatively decent tight end streaming option at some point this season. Irv Smith left the Cincinnati Bengals and signed with the Kansas City Chiefs. Okay, he's probably the tight end 3, maybe the tight end 2 in that offense. I don't really care there. Will Dissly signed a 3 year deal with the Los Angeles Chargers. I talked about it earlier. The Chargers are a team that's going to want to run the ball a ton. Will Dissly is actually a really talented run blocking tight end, and he's got pretty good hands as well. He's been a touchdown threat in Seattle over the course of his career as well. This is a team that needs pass catching weapons right now. You've got Quentin Johnston and Joshua Palmer as the leading wide receivers in this team. So I think Will Dissly could have some spike weeks, maybe if you want to deep league best ball dart throws. I kind of like Will Dissly, but I got to believe the Chargers are going to add more weapons, so I'm not super excited about that there. Colby Parkinson signed a 3 year deal with the Los Angeles Rams as well. This is sort of relevant. Parkinson sort of flashed every now and then in his NFL career, and the Rams, they got Tyler Higbee, who's coming off of a major injury in the playoffs. I think it's reasonable to assume that Parkinson is going to operate as the tight end 1 in this offense, at least at the beginning of the season. There's potential value there, but I wouldn't be super excited. Jonnu Smith signed a 2 year deal with Miami. This is sort of relevant for me. Jonnu Smith's a really good after the catch guy. This is a good passing offense. I think Jonnu Smith's got a legitimate shot to be a little bit fantasy relevant. He was last season in a bad offense as the tight end 2. So there's opportunity here for Jonnu Smith. And then Gerald Everett signed a 2 year deal with the Bears as well. He's going to be the backup tight end to Cole Kmet. Not excited about that either. And I'm just realizing I didn't put this down on the slide, but Dalton Schultz signed a 3 year extension with the Houston Texans. That's very exciting news for me. CJ Stroud is obviously an elite quarterback. Dalton Schultz is a talented tight end. There's certainly an opportunity here for Dalton Schultz to be fantasy relevant for a while. So Dalton Schultz is probably going to be a guy that I'm actually drafting a lot of. I think he's going to be a really safe top 10 tight end this season, and I like him quite a bit. So that'll do it for the free agent recap here. Hope you guys got everything that you needed out of it. Obviously, if there's anything that I missed or anything else that comes out, I'll be trying to keep you guys updated as the offseason goes on, make sure that we stay as up to date as possible. But of course, if you guys do have any specific questions or just want to talk, just let me know in the comments. It's a lot of fun. I know it's the offseason, so a lot of you guys that are watching this, you're probably just as crazy about football as I am. So it should be a lot of fun. Obviously, we've got long way to go this off season, but it's going to be a lot of fun here. I'll be putting out a video every now and then, probably about once every week or so, just trying to keep you guys engaged, get you guys as much content as I can, and then we'll really start ramping up when we get closer to the regular season. So I want to thank you guys so much for watching. As always, if you haven't subscribed already, if you're new to the channel, we're getting really close to that goal of 1,000 subscribers. I'd love to hit it before the NFL season officially kicks off. So we've got some time there, but if you haven't subscribed already, subscribe so you make sure you don't miss more content coming out. And if you have subscribed already, I want to thank you guys for being here, and just make sure to give the video a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm and all that. So thank you guys so much, and I'll catch you next time. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.